For 50 years, one fish ran the Illinois River, and it's losing that river right now. The ancient predator getting the credit for it never touched a single one of them. The water sits under the sandstone bluffs at Starved Rock State Park, about 90 miles southwest of Chicago. The Illinois Department of Natural Resources has been putting nets in that stretch since before the invasion started, and its crews are pulling up fewer Asian carp year after year. Something turned against them in that river. It wasn't the animal the state spent 15 years bringing back. Anyone who ran a boat through that water 15 years ago remembers what it was like. An outboard motor at speed pushes a low vibration ahead of it, and silver carp answer that vibration by leaving the river. Not one or two of them. Whole sections of the surface coming apart at once. Heavy-bodied fish clearing the water by several feet, landing on windshields, on coolers, on the people in the boat. Wildlife officials along the Illinois logged broken bones, concussions, and injuries that put people in a hospital, all of it caused by fish, and not one case of it involving a bite. A silver carp has no teeth worth the word. It strains its food out of the water through a filter in its throat, and everything it does to a human body is physics, a heavy animal moving fast into a skull that isn't moving at all. The pattern behind those injuries is consistent. It happens in warm months, when the fish are most reactive. It happens most often to small open boats, which sit low and put a person's head at exactly the height a launching carp travels. And it happens fastest to the people going quietly, because a carp that hears a motor coming for a mile has already moved, while a carp surprised at close range goes straight up. That was only the part happening above the surface. Underneath, the situation was worse. When biologists netted certain stretches of the Illinois and weighed everything that came up, Asian carp came to about 7 pounds in every 10. 70% of the living weight of an American river belonged to a fish that nobody in the state had seen before the 1970s. Boat ramps along the Middle River were surrounded by them. Commercial fishermen working for catfish and buffalo were spending their days shoveling carp off the deck to get at the fish they were actually paid for. 70% is the number that should stop anybody who fishes fresh water. A healthy river is a mix. Predators, forage fish, bottom feeders, everything holding its own share of the weight. In the worst pools of the Illinois, that mix was gone, and one imported species was carrying most of the river on its own. And nobody smuggled these fish into the country. They were invited. Nothing about the arrival was criminal or secret. In the 1970s, catfish farmers across the American South were losing ponds to algae, and the cheapest fix anyone could offer was a fish from the rivers of China that eats algae for a living. Silver carp and bighead carp came into the country as equipment, the way a filter or a pump comes into a fish farm. They worked too. Clean ponds, healthy catfish, no chemicals required. Then the South did what the South does every spring. Rivers came up, ponds went over their banks, and ditches that were dry in August turned into channels running straight for the Mississippi. It didn't take many escapes. A spawning female puts out eggs in numbers no native river fish can match, and the Mississippi Basin is a spawning ground built to order for a species that needs long stretches of moving water to reproduce. Inside about a decade, they were breeding in the wild, in the biggest river system on the continent, with nothing in it built to eat them. From there, the map did the rest. They pushed up the Mississippi, and where the Illinois River comes in above St. Louis, they found the best water in the entire basin for what they are. The Illinois is slow, warm, shallow, and thick with plankton, a river that produces food in enormous volume. For a filter feeder, it's the closest thing to an unguarded warehouse. Illinois fisheries crews started logging them in the lower river, then the middle river, then the pools below Starved Rock, and the dates in those reports read like a delivery route. 2 species did most of it. The bighead carp is the heavier of the two, a deep-bodied fish that stays down and feeds. The silver carp is the one that leaves the water, and it's the one that carried the population because it spawns hard, grows fast, and can turn a plankton bloom into fish weight quicker than almost anything native to North America. Where the Illinois flooded into its backwaters, the silvers followed the warm water in and came out the other side with another year class behind them. What that meant for everything else living in the river took a while to show up in the data, because carp don't hunt. A silver carp doesn't chase a native fish, doesn't corner it, doesn't eat its young. It swims with its mouth open and removes the plankton from the water. Gizzard shad live on that plankton. Bigmouth buffalo live on it. And every native fish in the Illinois, bass, catfish, sauger, all of them, live on it in their first weeks of life, before their mouths are big enough for anything else. Biologists tracking those populations watched them fall, and the cause of death was never violence. The bottom of the food chain was being carried out of the river in the throats of another animal. That is the part that makes this species harder to fight than a predator would be. A predator leaves evidence: bite marks, kill sites, a body. Starvation leaves an empty net and a survey number that came in lower than last year. And by the time the number moves far enough for anyone to act on it, the fish that used to be counted are years gone. Predator Waters covers one of these cases every week. Real biology in real American water. And subscribing is what keeps them coming. The reason all of this became a federal problem instead of an Illinois problem comes down to a decision Chicago made more than 100 years ago. The city was dumping its sewage into Lake Michigan and drinking out of the same lake, which went about as well as it sounds. So engineers reversed the Chicago River, dug a canal, and sent the city's waste inland toward the Mississippi instead. The Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal fixed the drinking water. It also connected two of the largest freshwater systems on Earth with a ditch, and anything swimming in one of them can now, in theory, swim into the other. What sits at the far end of that ditch is not a scenic resource. Commercial and sport fishing across the Great Lakes runs past $5 billion every year, spread over 8 American states and 2 Canadian provinces. More than 40 million people drink out of those lakes. And the Great Lakes are exactly the kind of water Asian carp exploit best in their early stages. Plankton-rich and slow to fight back, with a native forage base that has already been thinned by a century of other invasions. So the country started building. In 2002, an electric barrier went live in the canal south of Chicago, roughly 37 miles from Lake Michigan, running current through the water to turn fish around before they reach it. It has been upgraded, doubled, and monitored ever since. Then in 2024, funding was finalized for the Brandon Road project near Joliet, a $1.5 billion package of noise cannons, bubble curtains, flushing locks, and more electricity, all of it built into one narrow choke point in the river. $1.5 billion for a single spot on the map, because the fish had already covered everything below it. And every one of those defenses is aimed at the same specific failure. Not a wave of carp swimming up the canal in daylight. A few fish slipping past the current in a barge wash or a flood surge, reaching open water on the other side, and finding each other. Every piece of hardware in that canal exists to stop that one accident before it happens. Which is why the news out of Starved Rock landed the way it did. Somewhere in the middle of that engineering effort, the carp numbers in the Middle Illinois started dropping on their own. And there was a very good candidate sitting right there in the river. The Alligator Gar had been gone from Illinois so long that plenty of people in the state had never heard of it. The last confirmed wild one taken from Illinois water came out in 1966. By 1994, the state had it on the books as gone, wiped out by dam building, drained backwaters, and decades of being shot on site as trash. Then in 2010, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources started putting them back, raising fingerlings on a hatchery method the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had worked out in the south and releasing them into the Illinois River system. The animal itself does not look like something a state agency ordered from a hatchery. An alligator gar is armored in scales hard enough to turn a knife, built on a body plan that has barely changed since the age of the dinosaurs. It has a broad snout lined with teeth. It can gulp air at the surface and survive in water that would kill most fish. And a full-grown one is longer than the person holding it. It sits motionless in the shallows, waits, and takes whatever swims past. It is also, on paper, the only thing in the Mississippi Basin with any business eating a fully grown Asian carp. Native predators in the Illinois top out, well below what a mature silver carp weighs. Largemouth bass, walleye, channel catfish, none of them are built to take on a full-grown one. The gar is the exception. It is the largest predatory fish the system ever had. It evolved in exactly this kind of slow, warm, low-oxygen backwater, and it was here first. So, the pitch made itself. Restore the river's own apex predator, and the river handles its own problem for free, with no barriers, no contracts, and no chemicals. In 2016, when Illinois legislators were discussing the carp in public, that idea was on the table as a real possibility. It ran in newspapers. It has been repeating in one form or another ever since, all the way to the videos crediting the gar for the falling numbers at Starved Rock today. There is one problem with all of it, and it comes from the person with the most reason to want the story to be true. The biologist who ran the gar stalking program for the state has said on the record plainly that the gar was never going to have an effect on the Asian carp population. That is the man whose own project was being praised, telling anyone listening that the praise was misplaced. He was describing arithmetic. Between 2010 and 2013, Illinois released roughly 6,000 alligator gar into the river system. About 1,500 of them survived to adulthood. 1,500 predators, scattered across hundreds of miles of water, against a carp population measured in tens of millions of pounds in that river alone. A gar does not eat every day. It's an ambush animal that can go long stretches on one meal. Multiply 1,500 fish by a handful of meals a month, and the total never reaches a rounding error on the carp biomass, let alone a decline anyone could see in a survey. The second problem is the mouth, and this one is absolute. A gar has to take its prey whole. It grabs sideways, works the fish around, and swallows it, which means the only carp a gar can eat is a carp narrow enough to pass down its throat. A silver carp is that narrow for a few months. After its first summer, it starts putting on depth through the body faster than almost anything else in the river, and it keeps going until it's a broad, heavy, deep-sided animal. That is the whole reason nothing native was controlling them. An adult silver carp has no speed worth mentioning, no teeth, and no armor. What keeps it alive is being the wrong shape to fit inside anything else in the river. So even in the best case, a gar can only take carp during the window when carp are smallest, most numerous, and least worth eating. It cannot touch the breeding adults, and the breeding adults are the only fish that decide what the population does next. Stalking 10 times as many gar would not have changed the number at Starved Rock. The reintroduction is a real conservation win. Illinois brought back a species it had erased, in the water where it belonged, and that is worth doing on its own terms. It's just not responsible for one missing carp. Anyone who wants the rest of these cases can subscribe to Predator Waters, because the next one is already in the water. What actually moved the numbers is on a state ledger, and it started with money. Illinois runs a contract removal program that pays commercial fishing crews above market rate for every pound of Asian carp they bring in. That single detail changes everything, because carp are heavy, cheap, and nobody was buying them. Once the state guaranteed the price, netting carp stopped being charity work and became a living. Crews that had been struggling to make anything off the Illinois River started running it hard, all year. The technique they use looks nothing like fishing. Crews set long walls of net across a section of river, then run boats and noise toward them from the far end, driving the carp forward until the fish are packed against the mesh with nowhere to go. In one operation on the Illinois, crews pulled 750,000 pounds of carp out of the water at once. They also turned the fish against itself. Asian carp are social, and they winter in dense schools. biologists began catching individual carp, fitting them with radio tags and putting them back in the river. The tagged fish swim off and rejoin their own kind, and the crews follow the signal straight to a school holding thousands. The industry's own name for the tagged fish tells the whole story. They call it a Judas fish. Added up over roughly 15 years, and the program has taken about 78 million pounds of Asian carp out of Illinois waters, with something near 50 million of that coming from the Illinois River alone. 78 million pounds is an industrial harvest aimed at one species, running for a decade and a half in the exact stretch of water where the numbers are now falling. The state's remaining problem was demand. A processor will only buy what somebody eats. An Asian carp is a mild white fish that nobody in America wanted on a menu because the word carp arrives at the table before the fish does. So, in 2022, Illinois spent around $600,000 renaming it. Kopi, short for copious, with a marketing campaign, restaurant partnerships, and grocery placement behind it. Fisheries managers projected 12 million pounds of removal in the first year of the push. They came within 2 million pounds of that number in about 2 months. Netting accounts for the carp that came out of the middle Illinois. The harder question is about the ones still swimming and why they quit heading north. Because for all the pressure downriver, the strangest part of this invasion is where it stopped. The carp front has not meaningfully advanced toward Lake Michigan in over a decade, and it stalled in a stretch where nobody was setting nets at all. In 2024, a research team at the University of Illinois, led by fisheries biologist Corey Suski, went looking for the reason. They took young silver carp and put them in water drawn from the polluted stretch of the canal system north of the front line, the water carrying everything Chicago has been sending downstream since the reversal. Then they watched what the fish did. In clean water, a young silver carp behaves the way any healthy fish behaves in a new place. It moves. It works the edges, tests the space, keeps swimming. In the Chicago water, that behavior shut off almost immediately. The fish went sluggish and stayed that way. Nothing killed them. Something in that water took the drive out of them, and a fish that stops exploring stops moving upstream. That finding reframes the entire front line. The assumption for 20 years was that the carp were being held back by hardware, by voltage in the canal and concrete at Joliet. The Suski work says a large part of the job was already being done by the water itself, in a stretch nobody was defending, for reasons nobody planned. What is dissolved in that stretch took 100 years to accumulate. Sewage from one of the largest cities in North America. Road salt washed off Chicago streets every winter since cars existed. Industrial runoff from a shipping corridor that ran heavy manufacturing for generations. All of it collected in a narrow man-made channel with nowhere much to go, layered into the sediment, still sitting there. A young carp swims into that chemistry, and whatever normally tells it to keep pushing north goes quiet. Chicago dug the canal to move its filth away from its drinking water. The filth went inland, settled in, and has spent the last century doing a second job nobody designed and nobody paid for. Which is where all of this currently rests, and it rests on nothing solid. The carp line has held at roughly 50 miles from Lake Michigan for more than 10 years. 3 individual fish have ever been caught closer than that. One in 2010, one in 2017, one in 2022. Each of them within about 7 to 9 miles of the lake. All 3 were single animals. None of them came with evidence of a breeding population that far north, and that distinction is the entire margin the Great Lakes have. So whatever is holding this line, it has nothing to do with an armored predator coming home to its river. It's a check the state of Illinois writes to commercial fishing crews, renewed budget by budget, and it can stop being written. Behind that sits a stretch of poisoned water outside Chicago that the region has spent decades and billions of dollars trying to clean up, and that gets a little cleaner every year. The fish that finally reaches Lake Michigan will swim through water somebody worked very hard to make safe.